Audio check. Giuli, can you hear me?
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
And is it pronounced Giuli? Yes,
Yes,
Giuli or
pronounced Giuli, you
Giuli
got it.
or.
With the soft
Okay,
G.
got it. Great. Okay, just making sure there. Okay, hang on just a second here. And as I warned you beforehand, I got to warn the audience too. At some point, I'm going to mysteriously mute for about 3 to 5 minutes. If everybody could just be patient with me during that expected glitch in the show, I'd appreciate it. With my lifestyle, it's an unfortunate reality. Well, welcome to the show, Giuli, and welcome everybody to Radio Free Indiana with your host, Matt Parrott. Everybody be sure to check out imperiumpress.org to browse imperiumpress.org, selection of classics and Western and illiberal thought. Use the coupon code RFIDISC if you purchase anything from limited time 15% discount. Any and all lemon donations, ninja guineas, whatever you got, will go 100% to the Unite the Right lawsuit that we're fighting. And tonight I'll be debating Giuli on colonialism. Giuli can be found on YouTube at youtube.com/c/GIULI333/. I think that's the easiest way to find you, isn't it?
Yeah, I can just introduce myself. I started with politics. I guess my clout started with researching German National Bolshevism. Recently, my Twitter brand has been blowing up. I got up to 1.5k followers now. I don't keep track of the numbers, but point being is, currently I'm trying to push a more right-wing narrative of pre-Marxian materialism. Try to push some early Renaissance political philosophy. Just try to make the right wing more, let's call it, based. And also, shout out to the Munipol guys and shout out to the German people who are watching. I need to add a disclaimer to this because I did not know who you were before I started the debate. So a lot of people expect a shit-throwing contest from this debate. I'm not gonna call you any names, but we can save it for the end, I suppose. Primarily, I want to speak about the political case here. I want to show his audience that there's another perspective on the political realm. And if you guys expect me to just ruthlessly insult his mischievous past, then wait for the end for that. But right now it's about politics, which we both agreed on. Primarily a political discussion at first.
Oh, okay. Excellent. And this all happened rather quick. You actually wait just a second.
But that's a bit awkward, isn't it? Well, I guess I'll just host the stream from now on. Welcome to the Giuli show. Great to have you guys here. I know I promised you guys a Christmas stream, but it didn't really happen. So here we are. I see a lot of good people in the audience. Nice to see you guys. I see Arsenic, famous guy, Beepcash, a lot of famous people here. Jesus Christ, what an amazing audience. Always remember to follow me on Twitter at altusselhivcom. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube, youtube.com/Giuli333. Fantastic videos, top of the line. I'm working on a new video coming out pretty soon. I don't have a Patreon, I would ask for a grift, but are we back?
All right, sorry about that. I had warned y'all. You still with me, Giuli?
Yeah, I'm absolutely here. I'm aggressively here.
Hang on. I'm not hearing you on my headset. Of course. Give me just a second here. Audio test. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but you're much quieter than before.
All right. Do I have you back on the audio?
Yep, and you sound much better.
Okay, excellent. Yes, like I said, I'll clean this up whenever I upload it. This is the situation here.
It's indeed a
Okay.
situation.
Okay. And there might be another disruption, and I'll appreciate everyone's patience with that too. So, to kind of begin the conversation, um, it's about colonialism. I define colonialism as ethnic, tribal, or national identity group dominating and exploiting other ones. My position is what I call post colonial. I'm opposed to colonialism. I want to open the show with Giuli both defining colonialism in his terms and also explaining his disagreement with my position. That's where we'll start.
Okay, I got put in the backstage
You dropped
again.
briefly.
But,
Did okay?
okay, well, so what was the question?
Okay. We'll open the show with Giuli both defining colonialism in his own words and explaining his disagreement with my position. Did you hear my position?
No, I didn't.
Okay. To begin the conversation, I define colonialism as ethnic, tribal, or national identity group dominating and exploiting other ones. My position is what I call post colonial. I'm opposed to colonialism. We'll open the show with Giuli both defining colonialism in his words and explaining his disagreement with my own position.
That's fantastic. I love that. We actually have a good definition. We don't disagree too much. My position is very similar. I believe that colonialism is the ethnic exploitation or the one collective exploiting another. I think one can draw a straight linearity from the Bronze Age till today. I don't believe in this whole Marxist, Leninist, Maoist autism of defining colonialism by some capitalist narrative or economic narrative. Of course, economics are involved if you are exploiting other people. Point being is, I keep it simple. I don't draw a distinction between imperialism, colonialism, expansionism, besides an actual praxis.
Okay. That actually was one of my questions. Do you distinguish between imperialism and colonialism? And I haven't heard a straight answer out of that. And for me, I do dive into some autism in that I believe we are in a mercantile age now, and the colonialism slash imperialism we see today is necessarily dominated by mercantile capitalist oligarchs, as opposed to being in a martial age, managerial age, or an age of the laborer, if you will. Right. So,
Those are very vague terms, aren't they? Like fundamentally, like mercantile imperialism and continental imperialism didn't differentiate too much. If we look at, for example, the imperialism done by the German Empire or the imperialism done, for example, in Russia, it only differentiates in actual military praxis. It was still done for the economic benefit, very similar to the British Empire, the Dutch Empire, but just easier because you had a land border going on there. Of course, there's much more actual ethnic displacement in, for example, Western Poland, because we had a land connection. And I think that's where you have to give credit to the British, that even though this massive naval distance, they were still able to ethnically displace the more savage populations below there. I think the differentiation between mercantile and continental imperialism is very forced. It's more useful in military history or some practical history than in political.
Well, my answer to that would be like you had like the Carthaginians and the Romans, right? And the Carthaginians were more a thalassocratic mercantile people, like say the Dutch or the English or the Jews, versus being like a martial empire. So yeah, economics were still a driving force behind the imperium or colonialism, but you still had different people with different motives behind it, is how I would state it. But I think I fundamentally agree with your general premise that whether you've been subjugated by a martial or mercantile imperial historical force doesn't make a whole lot of difference for you if you're on the ass end of it, right?
Well, it does, of course. Like, for example, if we compare the peak example of like this completely just pure economic imperialism that we see, for example, with the Dutch, of course, in the late 19th century, I think that makes a difference. Like, the reason why the Indonesians got educated, not genocided, fundamentally, is because the Dutch were aware they weren't able to completely ethnically replace the Indonesians, therefore just drawing out the economic benefit. And I think the reference to like the ancient history is a bit more complicated. Like Carthage and Rome were massively different states. Carthage was not able, like, trust me, Carthage tried to expand in actual hard power in the North African continent, but because of how the government was structured, it wasn't their, I guess, ideological nature. It was more simply how the military operated. Like an empire like Carthage that does not have a standing army, that was largely relied on mercenaries, that largely had a decentralized state, simply could not expand like the Romans, even though it clearly wanted to. It was less ideological, it was just necessity.
Well, I would say that's rooted in their mercantile nature. They saw militaries as something you purchase in a mercantile way. They were a money-centered, money-oriented, basically proto-capitalists. And
mercantile nature, like what do you mean with nature? I mean, we had Carthaginians who then also aligned with Roman interests, or for example, Canaanites, for example, in the Bronze Age, who clearly didn't have a mercantile nature. I think it's less nature, more like geopolitical circumstance. It's much harder to have a hardline empire like Rome did in North Africa when you have an extremely decentralized aristocracy.
Okay. Well, I don't want to get too far off into the weeds with that. You make some good points. Okay, so what role does morality, in your opinion, play in developing what I would call the vanguardist ideology? And if I may interpolate a little bit here, I understand, in my opinion, there's a distinction between the sort of autistic ideology of the vanguard and then sort of a broader, and this isn't to say it's incompatible with the vanguard ideology, but you do have the politics and propaganda, which are necessarily spoken in a different language and framing than that vanguardist ideology. So at the core, behind closed doors, just among the Spurgs, when they're setting out the fundamentals of their worldview, how important is morality?
Well, there are a lot of big words here, like vanguard and ideology. Like fundamentally, I'm a state positivist. I believe that morality has a place in the state, and I think morality is largely disconnected from ideology and how it's actually implemented. That's what I mean with I support a right-wing materialism in this sense. I'm a state positivist, which means that morality exists for a reason. It's not some Kantian self-validating object. It's a means to an end, right? And I think morality largely exists to create and pacify identity conflicts inside the state and to create a practical cohesion for the state to expand its interests or sustain its interests. I don't really care about some idea of a vanguard or some idea of ideology. Those things are largely specifics. When we speak about morality as a political tool, we speak about like we want to create like some term that we can apply on most ideologies. And what we see in most ideologies is, besides, funnily enough, liberalism, but even then, is that we have a strong emphasis. How do you pronounce it in English? I don't really care. Point being is you have a morality that is adjusted by the state, for the state, and not some universal narrative. And that's also where we can lead into my primary disagreements, because I think the only way you can be anti-imperialist if you buy into a liberal or maybe late utopian socialist narrative of some universal morality and not a state-given morality.
Oh, okay. So in your opinion, the state is the primary locus of morality. You have the state, and the people exist within the state exist for the state. And
we can say collective. I think it's better, because maybe we have some anarchist artists in the chat, right? So we can just say collective instead of state, because they will get very angry at that term. But fundamentally, the morality exists for that collective, specifically.
Okay, well, that's those are very different moral priors from mine. I see the state as a vehicle for the folk, and I see morality as being derived from my Christian radical traditionalist perspective.
Fundamentally, like I don't want to get into like a metaphysical argument of like going against or for Christianity, but fundamentally, when we stick to the political realm, the Christian morality is quite secondary to that, as we saw, for example, in most modern and even early medieval politics. Like when we look at the peak of Christianity, right, in the political realm, we would need to look at like the 13th, 12th, 14th century, maybe even. And what we see in those situations, that Christian morality is, of course, some realm that we put over the language of politics, but fundamentally politics still operates without it. Like the reason why the Medici burned down Florence, for example, even though they were all Pope candidates, they were all Christians, or for example, why the hardcore Protestants slaughtered civilian cities, they were all Christians in that circumstance. I think fundamentally, if you want a good analysis of history, you need to kind of accept, I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying you need to accept the premise that morality comes by the state or by the collective for a means to an end instead of a universal narrative. I'm not denying that you should have, that you can personally maybe have a Christian narrative or a universalist narrative. I don't really oppose that. I have, of course, personal moral opinions too. But when I speak about morality, I implicitly speak about how we analyze political events like colonialism, like imperialism. And I think for that specific case, Christian narrative is not wrong, not good, just trivial.
Oh, okay. I actually don't disagree with you within the scope of this argument. If you look at Christianity's political role in European history, and not just European history, you'll see that. I mean, if you look at today, Donald Trump somehow insists that he embodies Christian values, and Joe Biden embodies Christian values, and
it's a narrative,
they're. You can build a wide variety of absurdly incompatible narratives on Christianity. So when somebody says Christianity, it can mean a wide variety of different things. I put radical traditionalist in front of mine to give it some kind of context, but you're right. In terms of how Christianity intersects with morality, I guess the question here would be sort of pre-moral then, in terms of like what are the goals of the state beyond I'm just exploring your position here to understand it. I don't even know what to attack here. What's the purpose of the state above and beyond its own perpetuation and growth?
Okay, let's just get straight to the meat of this. I think because the meat of this will be a maybe even state of nature discussion, because if you define the state as some, like from what I know, you're kind of in that Richard Spencer to your circle or like in that Matthew Heimbach circle. So you can think of the state in many ways. I want to make this definition clear. I think the state is nothing more than a tool for the collective to pacify identity conflicts, to put people together so they can act more productively, to expand their interests, or to sustain it, or defend their interests, sustain their interests, whatever you want to say. What's the primary tool of the state is to expand the interests of the collective that is agreeing to the state, or like signing the state, if you want to use some Hobbesian language here.
Right. Okay, so now I'm confused, because I thought earlier like the state was above all, and now you're saying that the state exists to serve the interest of the collective.
Well, the state,
am I confused?
I'm a Hobbes. No, it's a very easy thing that Hobbes even Hobbes gets often accused as. Basically, if you want my analysis of the state, I'm a Hobbesian. Fundamentally, I believe that the state, once it is established, is above the individual. Like the state is above the minute identity conflicts, for example, among the farmer and the hammer worker or whatever. But fundamentally, the state still has a reason to exist. The state still nothing is self-evident here, right? The only thing that's really self-evident to politics is that we have some urges, right? We can't really refute that I have the urge to drink water. But once the state is established, once the state has a material purpose for an end, then yes, the state can go over the interests of, for example, minorities, individuals, certain class conflicts. Very easy to explain. The state exists for the people, people is a very big word. Let's say the state exists for the collective, but can kill some parts of the collective.
Okay, so it would almost be analogous to a traditional marriage, in which once you become married, even if it's not in your interest to remain married, you're duty bound to this unifying abstraction, and the institution of marriage becomes more important than the individuals who entered the oath. Would that be a kind of an accurate analogy?
Maybe. I kind of forgot to listen, but yeah, sure, maybe.
Okay. So, is it in our interests, in my collective's interest, to dominate and exploit other people, in your opinion?
Absolutely. That's when we can maybe get this linear, because what we need to explain to the viewers is how this discussion came to be, right? I think that's very important to throw into the stream here. The discussion came to be because you made a tweet, and I may read this in my beautiful German accent. If somebody claimed that whites are bad because they're all child molesters, and you went to explain that whites are good because child molestation is okay, you would not probably be pro-white, sorry. You would be an evil dumbass. Same with colonialism, dumb asses. So I want to respond to what you say is still in line with your tweet. Fundamentally, I believe that the whole moral crux of imperialism is that it can be beneficial. It historically has been beneficial to quote-unquote white people, but then the universalist moral narrative is just because it's materially beneficial doesn't mean that you should do it. And that's why I find the equalization, or let's say hyperbole with pedophilia, very funny, because if you equalize the moral problem of imperialism with pedophilia, you kind of admit, or you kind of say that pedophilia is materially beneficial, which is a bit awkward. Fundamentally, I believe that imperialism can be economically amazing, prosperous. We've seen that historically over and over again, and it cannot be. But the narrative that you try to create in that tweet is that you make a universal narrative against imperialism. And that is not the case. We see imperialism has been great for the aristocracy in many ways, only for the aristocracy in some ways, sometimes for the entire collective. We see with Portugal, it was good for everybody inside of Portugal, of course. We see in the late British Empire, sometimes it wasn't good for the proletariat because they were forced into a hard industrial production because the colonies did not have that industry at that point. In the German Empire, it was absolutely beneficial to the proletariat because that allowed the exploitation we got out of Poland, out of the European lower peoples, out of the colonies weren't there at that point, but that becomes an important point later in the German social development. That's how we got healthcare and all these kind of things. So I make a very basic case. If imperialism, colonialism, expansionism, any other adjective is materially beneficial to the expansion of the state, the expansion of the collective and the people, you should absolutely do it. And there's no reason not to do that. And if there can be created a reason against that, that would be something outside of the realm of the political.
I mean, you're trivially correct that exploiting other people and taking their resources is beneficial to you within a very atomic microcosmic context here. But it's kind of like how it would be materially beneficial for me to go to the mall and rape an attractive woman. Okay.
It wouldn't, because you would go to jail for a longer time after it.
In America's current geopolitical context, the consequences of attempting to be colonial in the 21st century are equally harsh. Okay, that's the whole point of neocolonialism is masking the crime of colonialism, which has become unacceptable, has followed the path of chattel slavery into being universally morally unacceptable.
Okay, but that isn't universal. Like, by the premise of you saying it is not beneficial because of the American geopolitical context, it isn't beneficial, you're already refuting a universalist narrative, aren't you? Like, as soon as you establish that in the current geopolitical American context it wouldn't be good, you kind of refuted, I don't know if it's your own point, but from the tweet at least, you refute your own universalist point here.
I actually have to cut out for 3 minutes. I will be right back.
Okay. Well, welcome back to the Giuli Show, guys. How are you guys doing tonight? Let me open the chat. Are we back? Yeah, you sound like you're underwater, but maybe that's just America, I don't know.
How about now?
Sounds magnificent.
Okay. So you had told me I was contradicting myself or something. Can you explain that again? I was a little bit distracted, and so we're done with the distractions. I apologize to the audience.
It's fine. Trust me, we all forgive you. Point being is, if you make a moral universalist case, that would mean it's a self-validating object. Like, it means, for example, why is murder wrong? Because it's wrong. Why is imperialism bad? Because of some moral case that exploiting people is intuitively bad, or some shit like that. Like some self-validating object, right? Circular, basically, if you want to go like deep philosophical here. But if you say that currently imperialism is bad for America because the geopolitical consequences or the current inner political consequences would be so severe that it wouldn't make it profitable anymore, then you already are refuting that it's a universal, that you have a universal disagreement with imperialism, because you don't. You have a disagreement with imperialism because right now it is not in your interest.
No, I have both. and I can argue both at the same time.
And what is your? I mean, yeah, you could technically, but fundamentally, one is in the realm of the political and one is not.
Well, and that's why I'm arguing. I'm arguing the one in the political. For example, slavery. Same thing. It was beneficial for a time, and now if you try to own people, you'll get in all kinds of trouble, right?
All kinds of trouble, I suppose. Yeah, but like fundamentally, we can like slavery. By that definition, slavery isn't bad. Slavery was very done. First German government, I'm not advocating slavery, I'm just saying, in a theoretical circumstance, in a self-defense situation, we saw that the Arabs were very efficient with the slave trade by just castrating their slaves. If America would have castrated their slaves, the problem wouldn't be here today. And fundamentally, again, a colony to a large extent required slavery to sustain the insane material output that, for example, Brazil achieved in the late 19th century. So no, I wouldn't say slavery is intuitively bad. I think slavery can be good, and sometimes it's bad. If you do it like America, it could be bad. If you do it like the Arabs, why not? In a theoretical circumstance.
Okay, well, since we don't have the same religion, don't have the same priors, I feel like all we can argue about is political mechanics, and therefore my argument.
Yeah, we can argue about politics. Yeah, exactly. That's the point of what we're arguing about. That's what I was trying to say earlier. I like, for example, the average housewife doesn't like when like a Polish baby gets thrown off a cliff, I suppose. That's okay. I want the Polish I want the average housewife to think that, because I don't want my society to consist of people who are perfectly fine with throwing Polish babies off cliffs. But fundamentally, in the realm of the political is implicitly one out of advancement, defense, conflict, all these very important things. And in those things, sometimes you have to do things that are against the intuitive morality of the average person. And I think that's very important to understand. So I think it's great that you have this American Christian belief, but fundamentally, if you want to advance the interests of your whatever you consider your collective, that needs to be in the political background, or at least only in the aesthetic level of politics. We saw, for example, in many Christian fascist nations, or like I said, many medieval societies, that Christianity was the aesthetic of it, it was the language of it, but in the political, the leaders were smart enough and honorable enough to leave that in the background while they protected and advanced their own people.
At the end of the day, though, to animate our people, to motivate our people to fight back against what we're up against, we need that raw idealism. We need people who are willing to go against their own interests. That's exactly what we need. Are true radicals.
Bro, that's a very, very bad narrative. Like, listen, dude, like I respect what you're saying because there's a good intention behind it, but fundamentally what you're saying is that to accept the premise of why we are here, the reason why we are here is because the liberal philosophical movement, the utopian philosophical movement, and of course it's the most famous one. I don't know how's it called in American, the 68 or the 68ers, the whole 68 political philosophy movement, is because they were opposed of people or collectives acting in their own interest. Fundamentally, what the current right wing is, or the current third position, how you people would call it, needs to achieve is to return to a philosophical language or a political language of simply accepting conflict, collectives, and self-interest. If the average white person or the average German or the average political philosopher in general, even in academia, would agree that we have collectives that have their own interests, and those are contradictory to other interests, you basically already won. You don't need to speak about some vague poetry or futurism or Codrianu or like all these cultured Spurg things. All you need to make people realize is that politics is about conflict, and sometimes, the reason why we are in this conflict is because some people in the ruling aristocracy are not acting in their own self-interest to a certain extent even, or have their wrong collective for the self-interest in mind. The entire reason why we're here is because our collectives do not act in their self-interest anymore because of idealism. Fundamentally liberal morality, utopianism, that stuff is idealism. That is the issue. And that's why my YouTube channel exists, because I want to show people that idealism sounds cool, but fundamentally is a very bad narrative for the right wing to adopt.
Fundamentalism, idealism is all we have, sir. With all due respect, what's in my parochial best interest is to leave behind my collective, which is on the losing team right now, which is targeted.
So you want to be black?
I want to be an alienated wealthy American. I could have applied my talents in the private sphere and not made all these choices to fight for my people.
Yeah,
that
like to a large extent, you maybe should have, because fundamentally, when we speak about real praxis, is that while I appreciate that you create content for a fringe political audience, you could have done all of that without showing your face, but also at the same time being in a position of a better economical position, maybe even in a better political position, where you could have radicalized people. You could have shown people the right way, while at the same time not sacrificing any option for economic benefit or political benefit.
We've heard this bullshit for decades about these people who are infiltrating the institutions, who are
I agree, that's bullshit.
working pragmatically, and so on. And that's what's necessary is promoting a vision that people are willing to sacrifice for. People are willing not only to die, but willing to lose their jobs, willing to suffer, willing to sacrifice for a better future for their future generations, for a better future for themselves, and for that abstract vision. And you're not going to get, there's no road from here to where we need to be that goes only through self-interest.
Politics isn't this easy. Like, fundamentally, I have to quote a good friend of mine, Xi Jinping, German Twitter account, not the real Xi Jinping. Hit my DMs if the real Xi Jinping wants to talk with you. Point being is that putting yourself in a ghetto isn't winning. Like, you can make your little commune of maybe, I don't know, some trailer park commune where all white people are tread and stuff like that. But fundamentally, there are multiple strategies that need to be applied at the same time. Why do you think the current ultra, like, we can clearly differentiate between like the 50s, 40s, and 30s quote unquote liberals and the current liberals? As easy as like some pretentious idiots like Keith Woods want to say, well, it's all liberalism, isn't it? There is still a functional difference here. And why we can see how liberalism went into turbo drive mode, where it went into going from the vague idea of the maybe boomer liberals and the pre-boomer liberals of, well, you can let's better the material conditions of everybody. It went from let's put the disenfranchised into an above spot. And this ultra radicalization happened very easily. It happened by the 68ers. It wasn't as much as I would like, some easy narrative of putting a singular element on it, like Herder the Jews, or for example, Herder the capitalists. It was a multipolar movement. And what we see of the 68 movement is what they did is they were universally hated. In Europe, imagine being a fucking left-lib communist in like before Cold War Europe. It wasn't an easy time. They were persecuted massively too. What they did is they went to academia and started influencing the Overton window to a very minor extent, while at the same time they had free control, while at the same time they had these shitty communes. And what we see is fundamentally that the communes that these people made were the least effective part of their praxis. What we saw was the most effective part was simply changing the language of politics, the language of academia, and stuff like that. So
they changed the language of academia to promote their moral narrative, and the neo-colonial white saviorist moral narrative that our youth are being infected with is an idealism, and that's why you have these young women going to Africa and adopting these African and doing all these things against their interests, because they've been infected with a toxic idealism, and you're not going to reach the people who matter, the people who can affect change.
I'm not advocating that. I have a YouTube channel, bro. I'm not in a fucking NGO. Like, all my goal with my YouTube channel and my Twitter account, and fundamentally we are attacking the same realm here, is to make the people who are politically aware, who are caring about fringe politics in general, to get them into the right direction, where they have a good analysis of politics, where they can look at politics and understand why X is happening and why Y is happening, and then support them in whatever strategy they want to pursue. If somebody wants to do some Charles Manson like trailer park commune, that is completely all right with me. I mean, better than nothing, am I right? But if some guy wants to study history and philosophy like me, I want to give these people a chance to defend themselves in academia, move forward in academia, and maybe even change academic language again. I don't believe in some singular narrative here. I don't believe that there's one strategy, and I think that's a very healthy view to adopt. You can say what you want about that. You can't change the paradigms of the powerful, and to a degree, I agree, absolutely, because there's geopolitical and material powers that simply do not allow this position to shake. But if you force me to the choice, should I just accept what's going on, or should I offer people tools to maybe slightly to a slight overtone change in academia, which really isn't that hard to pull off when you actually are inside of academia, then yeah, I will certainly take the more positive second avenue. And again, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying here. Even you can do that. I'm just saying as there's a multipolarity of things that need to be adopted.
Okay. Well, first of all, I wasn't accusing you of like not being an influential enough geopolitical actor or anything like that. That wasn't my point. My point is that we must promote a compelling moral case that's coherent and resonates with the kind of people who are receptive to a self-sacrificing radicalism.
Yeah, I mean, listen, dude, I'm not opposed to this, like, military, like, fundamentally Western narrative of sacrificing yourself to the greater cause. I'm not opposed to that, but you have to understand to what audience we're speaking to. If I would be the base leader of Germany, I would say people join the SS, sacrifice yourself for the country. That is good. You want to tell the masses that, but the audience that we are appealing to fundamentally, sadly, that's the issue, isn't it? Not the masses. Like, for example, the philosophical reality of, for example, Nazi Germany or, for example, Imperial Japan was vastly different what the masses were told. And that's what I'm advocating for. I'm not opposed to giving the people idealisms and romanticism once you are in power, but fundamentally right now I would rather have these very few people that listen to our content have a good analysis of politics. And fundamentally what we have to accept here is that politics moves not because of idealisms, history moves not because of idealism, but history moves sadly, or not sadly, however you want to call it, by people advancing their own interests.
There's people advancing their own interests, and there's people advancing their own narratives. And
same thing, isn't it?
Not necessarily, right? Okay, so with arguing your case, you're arguing an amoral and even implicitly immoral case.
No, I'm not arguing for that. That's simply the reality. That's how, like, I'm not saying that should be or shouldn't be. I'm simply saying this is how politics is. Like, ideally, in my ideal world, I would wish for a unified Pan-Germania, a unified world where we all held hands and we all work together and we all are nice. That's, of course, what everybody wishes, I suppose. I'm just saying the reality of politics is that history and politics is moved forward by interest groups conflicting with each other. And that's all I'm advocating for.
Okay, well, you've retreated to that position on the show, but when I was arguing a post-colonial position, which you say now isn't incompatible with what you're saying, you were quite brutal with me and insisting.
I am. Okay, let's deconstruct this little chain you want to construct here. What I'm saying is that politics is the advancement of conditions and the advancement of interests, and that is the reality of it. And why I am pro quote-unquote imperialism is because if you don't participate, you will be participated in, but on the war stick here. I'm saying that politics is implicitly not your moral case, and that the idealism that you advocate for and that I don't even necessarily disagree with is simply a trivial outside part of it. I'm not retreating anything. I'm very much pro-imperialism because it advances my interests. But on my personal idealistic level, it doesn't really matter if I'm pro or against it. I can be pro everybody holding hands for all I care. I'm simply saying is that is not part of the politics, so to say. And I'm not retreating anything here, big guy.
Okay, so we keep going to different floors in this, in terms of on what level we're arguing. For example, I argue that in today's geopolitical environment, it is a terrible idea to be promoting imperialism, especially within our context.
So you're not a universalist, yeah. So we agree on that specific part, yes.
See, that's exactly what you did right there. Is I was saying, okay, we're on the floor of political mechanics, and I explain it in the terms of that context, and then you jump onto the elevator and go down into the basement, and we're like, okay, well,
because I mean, fundamentally, what we're arguing around is still that tweet, and if you maybe visualize it with a piece of paper or something. The idealism of universalism is disconnected even for me, but you try to combine it here in this context. And if you admit that right now the reason why we're opposed to imperialism on a political level is because it is not practical, because it isn't desirable, then you have to admit that you do not have a universalist narrative inside your political paradigm.
No, that doesn't admit that. If somebody asks me to go steal something from the convenience store, I can say it's illegal and the store closed over an hour ago. And those statements don't contradict each other, especially when I've made it clear
yeah, but they are separate entities inside the political realm. That's the point I'm trying to tell you here. Like, I don't disagree that you have personal grievances, and then, of course, a material reason why it would destabilize society, why the political, for example, on a personal reason, you would go to jail, right? That's a very personal. But on the political level, the reason why you don't want people in your country to steal is because that would destabilize the economy, would destabilize the cohesion of your people. But if you then say, well, the reason if the state or if your political analysis now says you shouldn't do it because it's immoral, then we have two different realms conflicting with each other. Well, not conflicting, but something being in the realm of the political, which isn't part of the political. Because the reason why a state says you shouldn't steal is fundamentally not because of the moral narrative, but because of the state positivist or the collective positivist narrative. And that's what I'm trying to explain here. I'm not being fascist, how's it called in English? Fascist, you know what I mean? Disingenuous. I'm simply trying to tell you is that the things to try to combine in one political space, not like I don't want it to be, but it fundamentally doesn't exist in the same political space.
Okay, so on what level can I argue this on without you moving to a different level?
I mean, on what level do you want to argue for right now? Like, because fundamentally the crux of the position here, of course, is that it's still the original tweet, which is imperialism wrong, yes or no, on a universal level? Is imperialism wrong right now from the American perspective, or like from the German perspective? If you want to speak about like geopolitical praxis or moral, ideological praxis, all these are different realms. And fundamentally, I was on the assumption that we speak about the narrative of your tweet. If you want to switch to a geopolitical discussion, then go ahead. But and I will join you in. Yeah, I will join in.
Okay, well, we began the show by both agreeing about the futility of arguing against moral priors, right? I'm not going to convert you to Christianity during the show. If you'd like to learn about the Lord Jesus Christ, you can hit me up in the DMs. I'd love to share that with you. But we both agreed that that's futile. That it involves.
Well, you're kind of reducing the argument, aren't you? Well, you're reducing the argument because my argument was not only saying it's futile to argue about morality, but also that it simply isn't part of the political. Like, that's the main crux here. That is the real core disagreement, which is that I'm saying that a universalist morality is never part of the political, if you want it to be or not. Like, that if you let that Christian reasoning or that universalist reasoning affect your politics, that's where my disagreement comes in. If you just have it in your personal core, that's fine for all I care. That sounds funny and stuff. But you seem like this Christian narrative is affecting what you would want out of your ideological praxis, ideological system, by how you analyze politics. And this is where I disagree at.
Well, I think to help explain it by an analogy going back to marriage, okay? The institution of marriage, whenever, say, you swear that oath, in the individual case, sometimes the wife can be like, "Wait, I settled. I should have married a more handsome man, and the guy down the street's more handsome." Or the guy could, have a similar thought. And you have this abstract ideal, the institution of marriage, that they both agree to. And while you can isolate examples of where defying the oath is beneficial for actor X or actor Y, what we learned in the 80s, was that in the aggregate, the idealism is actually superior to pursuing our own parochial interest. If everybody who divorced in the 80s had actually stayed together with who they divorced, they would have ended up happier, and the families would have ended up happier.
Listen, bro, I agree marriage is great and people should stay together, but fundamentally, politics isn't some individualist narrative. Politics is about collectives, right? And the reason why the political says you should stay together in a marriage is because if you constantly have breakups and all this kind of stuff, you have very dysfunctional families. You have a lot of social unrest. It's not desirable from the collective perspective. The reason why this analogy doesn't really work, and it's my bad, I suppose, I wasn't listening to the analogy earlier, is because politics is about the collective. And like I said, I'm not opposed to give idealism to the masses. That's great. I don't want to explain Machiavellian morality to the average guy to not rape his wife. Like, I want him to just say, well, it's wrong because it's wrong, isn't it? And yeah, that's great. But you shouldn't analyze what's wrong and what's right like the average housewife. Fundamentally, it is a bit more in-depth in the political realm. In the political realm and how politics operates, it is about interests, collectives, opposition and stuff like that. And what the average person understands out of that is a completely different realm. It's a propaganda realm. I don't think that's bad or good. That's simply the reality of it. So do I think the average person should have some idealism? Cool, that's great, fantastic. But if you want to look at politics and you want to analyze politics of why X and Y is happening, then you have to, if you want a correct analysis at least, a lot of people don't, but if you want a correct analysis of it, you need to look at the more, let's say, pragmatic reasons behind why things are happening.
Well, the problem with that, I mean, and you get into that if you actually read Machiavelli or you read game theory. Like you have these Nash equilibria. You have these complicated interplays that go beyond the logical capacity of the human mind, and it turns out that acting in your own best interest and thinking in your own best interests is not actually in your own best interest, as counterintuitive as that seems, even for the Ubermensch, even for the Neapolitan or Caesarean Superman that you imagine would be thinking about these issues kind of above the common man.
Bro, like that's my point. Like my point is that the people should not act in their materialist, ruthless self-interest because then your state collapses. You want to give the people idealism, but the state, the collective, right? The political analysis, the philosophers, the political philosophers, those people need to analyze things like that because that's how you get a good political result. States, like for example, you could have said, hey, Rome, don't conquer the Gauls. That is, even though it's in your own self-interest, it's immoral. Like the average person should not just go out and slaughter their neighbor because of their self-interest. Rome should have done that. And that is the difference between the political and the individual, you know?
I would even argue what became of Rome. What Diocletian saw when he returned to Rome, and whether it really was in their long-term best interest to be the heart of that empire.
Listen, buddy, I agree that overextension is an issue, but you cannot make the case that Caesarian expansion was the cause why Rome fell. And also, I think Caesar being the most clever about it, which is killing, like burning villages and killing 500,000 Gauls or something, was probably different than the overexpansion Trajan did in Mesopotamia. So, no, Rome did not have this narrative that you try to construct with immigration or non-Romans integrating because of Gaul. And you can see that we can say the same thing about Australia, for example. Do you really believe that Australia shouldn't have removed the Abos? Same thing. Like, do you want people to go to a neighbor and exterminate and ethnically replace their neighbor? No, I don't think that's a bit awkward. Wanted to ethnically replace them. Point being is, but the Australians in Australia, the English in Australia should definitely have done that. There's no downside to removing those very special people that originally lived there.
I believe there is a moral downside, and we're experiencing it now with the backlash. And
but it's not a historical necessity. We can clearly see that China does not have that. Russia does not have this. This is a very ideologicized thing. Like there is no historical must that the backlash is happening, and even though the backlash is happening, which I agree with, the response to that shouldn't be "we were so evil, we're so sorry, this will never happen again." No, the response should be, "Yeah, you got owned." Like that's fundamentally the funny crux about the whole pedophilia equalization, because what we did was good for us, it was materially beneficial to us, the colonization part, and the moral downside is only a universalist point. Pedophilia is always on an individual level bad, on a collective level bad, because it's intuitively disgusting, and it's of course not beneficial for the state. You have damaged children, it's not good. That's the difference. And would you really say that, like, what's the downside to like colonization in Australia? That like in the 70s and 60s, ideological narrative or philosophical narrative was pushed? No, like the British Empire was doing fine for like 300, 200 years. It was clearly beneficial to the average Brit. Same thing with the German Empire. Do you really want us to not colonize Brandenburg, remove the Slavs? No, I would rather have Brandenburg be German than Slavic, and there's no backlash now.
Okay. Well, at the very beginning, I describe myself as post-colonial in order to not be relitigating and trying to walk everybody back to where they were in 1491 and other what I consider absurd hypotheticals. I believe that colonialism, like slavery and feudalism, are morally and logistically obsolete things that we need to denounce, renounce, and move past without apologizing for our ancestors, without trying to make the world fair. And we can't be defending this toxic, morally bankrupt thing.
Then let's take the statement apart, because you have a good point here. For example, we moved on from slavery because it wasn't economically beneficial. At least that's a popular narrative. I recommend the book Modernizing a Slave Economy. It's not that easy to answer, but fundamentally, let's take the narrative. Yes, I believe abolish slavery if it's not economically beneficial anymore. But what we see is, would you say what China is doing right now in Africa is imperialism? That's a very important crux of what I'm going to say now.
Yes.
Okay, great. Then you agree, it is better for a nation to have absolute control over an African economy that has important resources than just hope these African countries collaborate with us for being nice. Like, Germany lacks important resources. Germany doesn't have oil. Germany doesn't have cobalt. Germany doesn't have these resources. And of course, we trade with African countries, but those are still free, democratic, economically multipolar nations. And that is an issue. We can't just sacrifice our cobalt production because that specific state just said, well, we will have a different government, or we will now align with a different geopolitical power. Many countries in Africa cannot economically disconnect themselves from China anymore unless they bail out completely. And that is clever from China because they now have secured the resources their people need to have important technologies, architecture, just any important resource that a country needs. And if you ask me, do I rather want to have some nice, friendly handshaking relationship with Nigeria, or do I rather have my people not lose cobalt in case any geopolitical tension comes up? I'm going to be honest with you, I'll take the second case. I'm not saying that colonialism is realistic anymore. I really don't, as much as I wish it would be. Fundamentally, all I'm advocating for is that if possible, if geopolitically possible, we should do the same thing as China. I'm not, by the way, saying I want to be ruled by the Chinese. I saw some retard in chat say that. I'm just saying that we should look what China's doing, which is watch out for their Han self-interest and do the same before we get fucked over by that.
Okay. Well, I have some qualifiers. Okay. China is there are imperialist elements to both what's going on in Africa and Central Asia right now, but they are actually juxtaposing their own relationships with these countries against Western imperialism and leading with an anti-imperialist moral argument. When Mugabe made his relationships with China, they were predicated on China rescuing them from the evils of colonialism, right?
Yeah, that's called populism. That's not the reality of it. We both agree to the earlier premise that imperialism is when one ethnic collective exploits the other. And again, even Imperial Germany said, or Imperial Italy said, oh, we're all working together. Fundamentally, that's just populism. That's a big issue with this.
Okay, well, if it's voluntary, then it's not getting fucked. It's making love. Okay,
it's not voluntary. It's not voluntary. All these African countries, if they would bail out of the Chinese economic partnership they have right now, the entire economy would collapse. This is not. It's like holding a gun to somebody. Well, you can just walk away, and if you walk away, I'm going to pull the trigger. It is, of course, different than 17th century aesthetics of imperialism, but fundamentally, it is still imperialism, and the language they want to use around that. Of course, doesn't really matter. Germany and Poland in 1940 said, oh, we'll try to liberate you from the Russians, but we could both agree that probably what we were doing in Poland wasn't the most beneficial to the Poles.
Okay, well, and the Poles on the street would agree with you that it wasn't in their interest, which is in contrast to what's going on in Africa, where while there are imperial elements that I will concede, the general picture, and China is taking the lead on this, is an anti-imperial approach to geopolitical relations.
It's a narrative. It's a propaganda element. It's not reality. Like, fundamentally, both countries are doing imperialism. The difference is they're just better at it and the aesthetic is less violent. You're really overestimating the language impact here. Like, the average person at the moment doesn't think badly of the Chinese because right now on the upside, they're getting economic things pumped into them. They're in the industry and infrastructure is getting built up. African people are getting jobs. But fundamentally, a large percentage of the GDP is not going to them anymore. It's like in some countries it's up to 30%. Just like the average person doesn't think, oh, I guess 30% of my welfare check right now is going to the Chinese. It's much different than like an Italian soldier stomping on the head of an Ethiopian child. But fundamentally, that is still the exact narrative that I'm proposing. One collective exploiting another, and the West not participating in that simply will means that the West will lose that.
And
that's it.
If it's voluntary. If it's voluntary and it's mutually beneficial, then I don't believe that fits my definition of exploitation.
It isn't mutually beneficial in the long term. It isn't really. Like, we both know what will happen when the fucking loans cannot be paid back by the Chinese anymore. And like, this is a thing that is over historical. Sparta, of all people. I don't need to explain you what Sparta was. Sparta and advocated a narrative of almost anti-imperialism in the Peloponnesian War. This is as natural as imperialism, that you tell the people that it isn't imperialism.
Okay, well, I have conceded that there are imperial. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have.
You can hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I've conceded that there are imperial elements, but I don't believe that China's approach to Africa is corroborating your position at all. I believe it shows that geopolitically, all the major actors are moving away from colonial exploitation and moving towards more decentralized, multipolar, and equal and autonomous roles for the various nation-state actors.
Because it's easier. Like, fundamentally, we're in a very interesting geopolitical time frame at the moment where every nation is in a stalemate. No nation can just go invade Africa because we have remember, we are still in a singular hegemon world. Right now, in this specific moment, America is still the hegemon and NATO still exists. Can the same thing be said in 30 years, 40 years? It would be very doubtful. But what's happening is that every nation that is in any way rational, that knows what it's doing, is preparing that Africa will be a major resource core of future society, therefore not letting their geopolitical potential enemy take full control of that. And what is happening in Europe, what is happening in China, is that very specific realization. And even America, to a certain extent, still has that. They're just wars at it. And if America has bases and economical influence in Africa, and you want to call it imperialism, but not the Chinese, you can do that. It's maybe a nice populist phrase, but fundamentally, it is still opposed to the interests of the actual people there in both cases. If they're aware of it or not doesn't really matter.
I think Africa's development over the last couple decades speaks for itself in terms of the quality of life, standard of living, industrialization, access to jobs.
Yeah. Great.
I mean, back in the 80s, it was just assumed that all Africans would starve forever. And there's been a lot of steady progress in Africa. And
That's idealism, yeah. But like, point being is, here's a very basic question, right? Okay, let's do two narratives here. I'm very interested in your perception on that, okay? Would you agree that the British Empire was beneficial to Egyptians and Indians?
Probably, all things considered, yeah.
But it is clearly imperialism, correct?
Yes.
Okay, then we can apply the same terminology in China, which is doing basically the same thing, just they don't have red coats pointing guns at Indian deserters. Like, it's still the same economical motion here happening. And I think we're going off path. Like, I find historical discussions very fascinating, but to stick to the core of this discussion, here's a very easy question, okay? Which I'm just interested in. If you think it's out of the plot, it's out of the discussion, just tell me to shut up. But if it was in the American interest, and let's not say even American, because you people have a problem with that, if it was in the white American interest, your people, I think you're white, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Keep that up, by the way. If it was in the white American interest, would you nuke all of Africa? Would you make all of Africa like scorched earth? If it was in the white Americans' interest?
Only if it were an existential either or hypothetical. I would not just do it for a better future for my people or whatever. No,
Why?
because morally that's reprehensible. Because geopolitically and tactically, having these things that you wouldn't do creates opportunities for relationships of trust to grow between nations and geopolitical actors. And one of the reasons why we're falling behind Africa or falling behind China in Africa is because we've lost the moral argument with the African people versus the Chinese moral argument.
First of all, that is like the question was if it was materially beneficial. Losing geopolitics is still material, right? Like if again, if you argue like if it was materially beneficial, right, including geopolitics and everything, would you nuke Africa?
Okay. Well, as a Christian, no, I would not. I would not kill a billion people for my material benefit.
For your people's material benefit. Let's make that clear.
For the material benefit of my people. Correct.
Okay, great. And the only response to that would be morality, like your Christian morality, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. That is a very good thing that you stated, because that is, again, still my main disagreement. Like, I think that's good that you have the morality, but fundamentally, if it's in, let's say, if it's in your interest, like, there's no downside. It is just do it because somebody in another country will do it for you, and then they will have that benefit. Again, this is the beauty of politics, isn't it? That you don't have this autonomy in politics. And most of the time, when it's beneficial in the interest of the nation, they will do that. So I don't really see, like, you agree that fundamentally in politics, universalist moral narratives aren't impacting. Like, there's no time in history, even in the most Christian time, where a leader didn't act in his nation's interest for that.
Well, there are, and to go back to my overused analogy here, with the marriage oath, you're married to them in sickness and in health.
But that's an individual narrative. We already spoke about how that's different. That's an individualist narrative. We speak about collectives.
It's an analogy, and it scales. Okay, you are loyal to your wife in sickness and in health. Even if she gets cancer, you have to remain loyal to her until death do you part.
I know that it's very hard for you to conceptualize, but Africa is not your wife or your husband. Like, Africa is another outgroup. Africa is not your people. Africa is not your wife. Like, you should never break the oath to your own people, but black people are not your husband.
I understand that, but it's the same general principle of having core principles, core ethics that you abide by. And that you present, and that creates the foundation for building trust that organizational and political and social superstructures can be built upon.
But that's not how it was ever historically. That's not how it ever will be. Like, fundamentally, the reason why I'm not arguing against you like you're doing some evil is because even when you say that fundamentally this is not how politics operates, like, I agree with you that it is a very nice construct inside your own society, but the reason why morality exists historically, how it developed, is simply as a form of sustaining your own collective. It is very rare and basically non-existent in history where people did what you're describing in real political motion. So,
okay, well,
nice to say that, but in political reality, won't.
Okay, well, there are no longer truly alien political collectives. Okay. Things have gone global. I'm anti-globalist, but anti-globalism is a global struggle, right?
But the identity is still not global. Like, nobody has a global human identity until aliens invade or something. Nobody will have a human identity.
There is a global human identity. We do have issues with the climate change, and the kind of bullshit that the UN deals with. There are common human concerns, okay, and there will be.
Yeah, but that's not how identity is constructed. Like, when we speak about now how do political identities form, that's of course complicated topic, but fundamentally identities in politics, I say fundamentally too much, but you guys are getting what I'm saying, is that it's like there's no alternative to this motion, is that identity comes out of negation, out of material interests. And of course, global warming, pollution, all that stuff is in some way affecting every human on Earth. It is not strong enough in any way that there are political unions formed around it that could unite the entire Earth. Both China and America and Europe are heavily affected by climate change, but China will not sacrifice their own geopolitical security to combat climate change in fucking Africa. They won't, and Europe will neither. Neither will America.
They're doing that. If you watch what China's doing domestically and internationally, they are leading in pollution control and are getting the plastics in the river under control. And I mean,
because in their because in their own country, that like China is currently from global warming fucked beyond belief in their own country, and they're trying to solve that. But China will not surrender its geopolitical position because in Africa there is some fucking slightly higher degree of farming land.
Okay, well, there's a clinal pyramid of interest, right? I mean, I have my wife, I have my family, I have my community, my ethnicity, my nation, my race, and then
your class, yes, all those identities.
I have, and identifying as a human with common human ethics is a part of my pyramid, and I think
human ethics. Human ethics have been changing a lot in the last 20 years for them being so natural to us. Isn't that a bit weird?
Well, that's the point, though. We're moving to a global mode of existence, and we, as I guess I should speak for myself. I, as an identitarian, need to figure out how my identity interacts and intersects with the rest of the people around the world. And I don't believe your approach is healthy or constructive for that conversation.
Let's deconstruct what I just said, because fundamentally why I said it again. I'm correcting myself. Point being is the reason why that human identity, quote unquote, is pushed because it's a narrative, it's a propaganda element, it is not real. This human identity in political reality doesn't really exist. It's still interest. And again, identities don't just exist equally. Identities exist in how much they are currently in conflict to another, right? The reason why class identity at the moment is so utterly irrelevant is because class is largely pacified. People don't live in 18th century industrial communes anymore. Like even Amazon is like the worst oppressor of like the Western prowl, fundamentally can deal with the class identity because the class conflict isn't that strong. Ethnic conflict right now in the Western world is largely pacified because we don't have any strong ethnic conflict, and it's rising with that ethnic conflict arising again. Same thing about sexual identities. All these kind of weird things depend on conflict, and as soon as it's in the material interest again for this ethnic identity to arise, it can of course be influenced by propaganda and stuff like that. It will arise, but there is no conflict to human identity besides these very vague global existence, quote unquote, threats. But I just don't see how global warming will be strong enough, like for example the German ethnic identity to unite people, like the Germanic ethnic identity united Germany. I don't see any direction towards a human unification. I actually see the opposite. I see these global one blocks decentralizing and becoming a multipolarity again.
Well, global warming is perhaps a silly example. I believe it's perfectly valid, but just what we're talking about in terms of me making it clear that I'm not going to nuke Africa. Okay, if I come out there and say I'm going to nuke Africa, I'm going to break my promises with Africa if I think it's going to be at my advantage. Bam! Right there, I've lost every contract in Africa. I'm going to have to go somewhere else for my rare earth metals, and I've got myself in a whole mess of trouble.
That's come on, now you're being disingenuous. Like I clearly said, if it's in your material interest, what you're describing again is if it's in your material benefit. Then if you want to like make this argument, it would be smarter from your perspective to just say, well, it will never be in my advantage to nuke Africa. Like, okay, I can work with that, but what you're describing is a bit, come on, you're better than that.
Okay, well, I don't know. I don't know what the utility of your point is. If it just kind of circles back.
To show that anti-imperialism can be good or can be bad, but fundamentally there's no real downside to it in a universalistic political narrative. I support imperialism when it's good for me. I don't support it when it's bad for me. It's really simple if you think about it. Like, for example, there's a point where, for example, you could have said the Spanish colonialism was fucking atrocious at one point. If I was Spanish, I would have said, hey, colonialism is stupid. Let's not do this. If you ask me about the German Empire, about the Portuguese Empire, of course, I would have been the most hardened colonialist you could have ever met because it was extremely beneficial to us in this case. And I do not support, if I was American, from the American perspective, which I'm not, and I'm happy I'm not, but point being is, if I was American, I would heavily support some form of Chinese economic colonialism, but I wouldn't support some 15th century Portuguese spice trade again, because one would be materially beneficial, one wouldn't be. I would support, if I'm in China, I would support what they're doing right now, but I wouldn't support heightening the tensions there, and so on and so on. Imperialism can be good or can be bad, and fundamentally, this is what all these third worldists on Twitter need to realize. And I don't want to categorize you, but you know who I'm talking about, or like your crowd. Can you give me like a catchy nickname which I can call your people or like your crowd?
I think third worldist is pretty appropriate.
Okay, let's go with that. Like, and that's like what third worldists need to. Like, that's what third worldists need to understand. It can be good, it can be bad, and as soon as it is good right now in many ways too, for Europe at least. So no, anti-imperialism isn't equalizable to pedophilia, and it certainly isn't some universal downside. I'm sorry.
Okay. Do you believe that the will to power is necessarily a zero-sum game?
The will to power. Oh, big Nietzschean. If you ask me for the urge to people to advance their interests, yeah, I believe resource scarcity will always exist, and any philosophy that includes post-resource scarcity is retarded and ahistorical.
Okay. Now, if you look at the world today, I mean, there are still resources that are scarce. But would you admit that the necessity of land war and the scarcity of resources that led to actual hunger, not just the kind of logistical marginal hunger we deal with in the 21st century, but actual, like, the French don't have enough bread style hunger.
I mean, yeah, that's like, because Europe was very good on history, kind of avoided that, but I still, and for example, food at the moment is not scarce. I'm not advocating for that. I'm simply saying that history goes up and down, and a Marxist or utopian narrative of linear history where we move to a post-resource scarce society will never happen. I agree that right now stuff like food isn't scarce, but what is definitely still scarce is stuff like less cool, less direct stuff like warm water ports, for example, stuff like technological resources. All these things are still scarce, will always stay scarce. And if we look at history, how it really was, things go up, things go down, and some resources we currently have in mass will become scarce again. So I do not believe in any premise of post-resource scarcity as like a linear historical narrative. If you just ask me, do I believe that we currently have a lot of food? Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. But you think that that's cyclical in nature and will surely end up in some kind of acute scarcity event in the near future, mid future, or don't care to speculate?
No, I was making a general historical argument that things go up, things go down, and that in the future we will be in a resource scarce event again. Things go up, things go down, empires fall, empires rise. Right now, in the near future, I don't see Europe having resource scarcity around food. Like, Europe is very, very well in that context. Europe will have other problems in the next 20 to 30 years, but food will not be one of them.
Okay, what problems do you think those will be?
Oil will be a massive fucking issue, and I don't think Norway is able to sustain all of Europe. Coal in Germany isn't effective. Nuclear power is our only way. Europe has problems, largely focused on technological resources. Cobalt, the most important one for modern technology. Oil, those are big issues. America, of course, has, I don't know much about American geopolitics, but China has big issues with oil too. Getting trash out. Like, these things will be important. For example, Russia has other issues. Warm water ports are a big thing for Russia. How can we export things, import things? From where can we import, export things? How can we finance or defend our trading routes? Those things will be, in the Western world, very important. But my point was more that this is not eternal. Like, my primary refutation is that if you believe in a linear narrative that, for example, we just have this utopian socialist post-scarcity thing, then this is largely ahistorical. And we can clearly see that in the Roman Empire, you could have said, oh, well, one day we will own the entire earth and we will have everything. But what happened is the Roman Empire collapsed. In the Bronze Age, people could have said, oh, everything we will be all interconnected. Well, the Bronze Age collapsed. The Carolingian Empire collapsed. The French Empire collapsed. The American Empire will collapse. That's more what I'm trying to say. Because the utopian socialists and the Marxists, to a certain degree, of course, believe that we are all moving into one direction of that post-scarcity universalism, which I think comes out of a lack of historical research.
Okay, I'm generally in agreement with you there. I think my disagreement, obviously, we have our moral priors, but I believe it's very imperative, at least in today's age, to try to build those relationships of trust between different identities, and try to construct more opportunities for mutual support and growth. And
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, well, it's my opinion that what you're presenting undercuts that. And
not really. Like, make positive relationships where you can make positive relationships. Make strong, hard enforcements of the relationship where you can do that. Like, it really depends on circumstance. Like, Germany is not going to be able to subjugate France in any recent future, as beautiful as that would be. But we can make good relationships with France. Make sure that we are working together for the next couple of decades. And because I cannot enforce a hard power over France, I'm not aspiring, advocating for that. But I think in African economies, you can very easily do that. And I think a hard power economical bond is better than a polite trust agreement, because in history, polite trust agreements fall apart very quickly. Hard economical ties don't.
Okay. Okay. Well, I generally agree with that too, and that circles back to the marriage thing in the modern world. The marriages where there's not strong economic interest to stay together seem to be more fragile, right? So I think unless there's anything else you've got to add, I think we've.
Let's look at the. Can you tell your mods to unban my homies, my fans, like free my boys? Because they banned a lot of people supposedly, which is a bit rude. And we wanted to involve the chat a bit, which I think is healthy. So I think we can you do 10 more minutes of maybe going back and forth with the chat a bit?
I don't know who they banned or why. I'm going to trust the judgment of my moderators on that. If you can remember any chats, or if you moderators might have anybody who you think you might have banned a little egregiously, go ahead and unban them. But I'm going to trust y'all's judgment on that.
I respect that you have the whole thing of they were just following orders of your mods. It's a very German mindset. I respect that.
Is there anything you can recall that they said or anything?
Well, let's just look like what the chat is currently saying. Most countries aren't food secure. Okay, kind of boring. They basically there's a live, like, people are live watching this debate, and they posted a Discord link to the live watch event where people like spectate while they're talking to each other, you know. So if they could allow me to post the link, if you could ask people
I don't think I'm going to trust the mod's judgment on that. I don't know what this Discord is about.
I feel you fully understanding. Go on alttussle.hiv, come Twitter and join that server, and I think that's a nice compromise for this issue. I got the first question right now. I think that's to you. Can I read it up? It's from one of my boys.
Yep.
Please ask on my behalf whether the guy thinks the material economic situation in relation to oil and material shortages will be conducive to this global peace order.
My position is that peak oil is bullshit, that we have massive untapped and barely tapped reserves that are going to last us for generations. And we have next generation nuclear, thorium, and other technologies on deck, already on deck. I mean, nuclear power has been sitting there waiting for oil to not be economically competitive for generations now. I think the concern about oil is misplaced, and I believe that I don't see any major scarcity issues. I think if there is one, it'll come by surprise, whether it's some kind of rare earth metal or phosphorus or something like that. But it won't be oil, in my opinion.
Okay, very very interesting take. Here's another take. What do I foresee happening to birth rates in the EU? I think that's towards me because you're not European. Well, if you look historically, birth rates always go up and down. So I suppose that as soon as like geopolitics tends up again, which they will in a pretty soon time, I think if you look at the historical average, they will go up again. If you mean in the sense of immigrants adjust to the European birth rate by the second generation. So I don't know what you were specifically asking for, but here are the two answers to that.
Okay.
What's so hard about not insulting each other? Well, did I insult you too much? I think I was kind of polite.
I think you mentioned me living in a trailer park 7 or 8 times, but other than that, we've been pretty cool.
Don't you? Like, for example, I need to add this disclaimer to the end of the discussion. I did not know who you were. Like I saw a dumb tweet. I'm a simple man. Simple man does simple thing. I see a dumb tweet, I respond. I didn't know you were the cuckbox guy.
Okay, I did have that personal issue in my private life. I am the founder of Traditionalist Worker Party and have achieved a lot in addition to having some private troubles. And it is what it is. I've never.
One question: did you ever hear the song like that?
If you're going to belabor this, we're going to have to wrap it up.
Oh well.
Do you guys have any intelligent questions?
Mom has got it going on. You know the song?